If you like Andrew, her favourite son, then there is a common slurp to those who are really close to her, according to what I've read in the book. He wasn't really a favourite, she was genuinely concerned about him. It was more of a concern than a favourite, she could see that he was weak. He was attractive, but he was also rather lost. In 2001 he left the Navy. She and her team eventually ran out of options and stated, "Look, there really is nothing for him to do," after trying to persuade the Navy to keep him on in some form. Did she feel sad for her own son, you know? I believe she occasionally felt sorry for him. Yes. I believe that some of his actions irritated her. This is the tale of how Prince Andrew allegedly hit one of Queen Elizabeth's most senior assistants during a dispute about the availability of a room, and why royal biographer Robert Hardman says the late monarch's only reaction was 4 measured words. "I am aware of his personality." April 9, 2026, timed release. Hardman's most recent piece, which coincides with the centenary of Queen Elizabeth II's birth, describes an occurrence so startling that a retired Prince Philip came out of seclusion to write a letter of apology on his son's behalf. Elizabeth II is the title of the magazine. Before its formal premiere, the Daily Mail and the Inside article published serialized versions of the article in both public and private. Every news cycle was almost quickly caught by a single narrative. At that time, Andrew Mountbatten Windsor was still. The master of the household, Vice Admiral Sir Tony Johnston Burt, was violently assaulted by the Duke of York. To completely understand how serious this disclosure is, the background of Sir Tony Johnston Burt's status is crucial. This was no inexperienced employee, but a retired Royal Navy officer who had overseen Joint Helicopter Command operations, commanded HMS Ocean, and piloted helicopters during the Falklands War. Sir Tony is a perfect example of. Both men had Falklands expertise flying helicopters, and Andrew had previously dreamed of becoming a decorated military figure. As master of the household, Sir Tony was in charge of what Hardman refers to as the royal establishment's largest personnel department. What then happened that resulted in what palace insiders described as a kinetic blow between these two men? According to Hardman, it began with the most ordinary of situations. Andrew tried to put together a presentation at the palace gathering at Buckingham Palace, the project he started in 2014 with the stated goal of connecting tech businesses with possible investors. At its height, Pitch at Palace was one of Andrew's most notable endeavours, and one of the few public positions that continued to give him a sense of direction within the royal hierarchy. But the problem was simple. The palace calendar was already completely booked, therefore there was nowhere suitable for the function. An elderly household insider told Hardman's. This is the direct quotation. It was an ordinary household issue. The Duke desired to hold a reception there. There was no space. That was all there was to it. Like everyone else, Tony claimed he would have to wait his turn. The Duke then pursued him. According to Hardman's description, what followed was not just an outburst of expletives and a jab of a finger, but what one staff member described as a kinetic blow. It was astonishing, even by Andrew's standards. In the course of a later GB, Hardman described the interaction in a news appearance as shoving and punching, a kinetic blow aimed at what he described as a very senior royal aide who was very distinguished, well-liked and trusted. The palace reacted quickly and decisively. The issue was brought before Lord Chamberlain by Sir Tony. "I've been told you've been treating members of the household in a wholly inappropriate way," said Lord Peel, who approached Andrew head-on. It must end. There was no regret in Andrew's reply. As Hardman records, "I gather you've been calling and causing problems," Andrew said over the phone to the Lord Chamberlain. Due to the seriousness of the situation, Prince Philip, who was already avoiding public appearances and living in relative solitude at Wood Farm on the Sandringham estate, wrote a formal letter of apology to Sir Tony. Given that the Duke of Edinburgh was already involved, the fact that Philip felt obliged to step in tells something about how serious the situation was. He seldom got involved in domestic concerns and purposefully kept his distance from royal affairs. Staff members referred to Andrew's final written apology as a sorry, not sorry letter. This may be the most illuminating feature. According to Hardman, a senior staff member first tried to hide the entire incident from the Queen, downplaying it to avoid making her blush. When she eventually learned the facts, she didn't show surprise or rage, using only 4 subtle phrases instead. "I am aware of his personality." Hardman and other royal observers saw Sir Tony Johnston Bert's knighthood in the months that followed this altercation as the Queen's subtle assessment of who was morally superior. In essence, it was a subtle but clear signal from the King recognizing skill and loyalty, without ever openly admitting the circumstances that had placed Sir Tony in such a precarious situation. What knowledge does? What does this occurrence reveal about the relationship between the late Queen and her second son? Hardman's portrayal, which shows the Queen seeing Andrew as her frail kid, is melancholic rather than scandalous. Andrew, who arrived 10 years after Princess Anne, is often seen as the start of her second family. A seasoned member of the royal family told Hardman that she was constantly concerned about him because she saw his weakness and believed he had been duped by evil people. Individuals. This description was supported by other revelations from the book. Hardman was informed by a family friend that Andrew just drank room temperature water and abstained from alcohol entirely. Andrew allegedly responded, "I tasted it once when I was a teenager and I didn't like it," when asked about this decision. "That's why the Queen would always worry about him," the friend went on. According to Hardman's sources, he has juvenile tendencies and never completely matured. Even the Royal Navy, which had tried to keep Andrew because of his actual helicopter flying skills, had reached its breaking point by 2011. However, Hardman records the Navy finally telling the palace, "Look, there's nothing we can do," nor was the Johnston-Burt scenario an exception. Hardman told GB News, "The more tailies I heard about Andrew's actions, the more people would be suspicious, regardless of whether they spoke to diplomats or Lord Lieutenants." Andrew's story in motion. Hardman was informed by former Prime Minister David Cameron, who fired Andrews as the UK's trade ambassador in 2011, that Andrew was merely a liability and that everyone else in the family was aware of the limits. They were aware of what they should and shouldn't do. Lord Peel put it even more bluntly, saying that Andrew had a strong sense of superiority over the others, a self-confidence that allegedly made working with him difficult. Even the most experienced diplomats and courtesans must practice a great deal of patience. Hardman's final evaluation of the Queen's handling of her son is delivered subtly but clearly. He argues that her favoritistic treatment of Andrew should be included on the comparatively modest list of things she did incorrectly, adding, "I think she got a lot more right." One of the hardest things the Queen ever did, according to another Hardman source who spoke to Hello magazine, was consenting to write Andrew's resignation letter from royal duties in 2019 following his terrible BBC News Night interview, which Emily Maitlis described as one of her lowest points. The publication date of April 9, 2026, just days before the late Queen's 100th birthday on April 21, 2026, is especially poignant. It came at a time when King Charles had removed Andrew of both his ducal title and his princely rank in October 2025. This fact includes his arrest in February 2026 on his absence from the royal Easter Sunday liturgy at St. George's Chapel on April 5, 2026, while his 2 daughters, by agreement with the King, remained away. The story of a mother whose love for her son outweighed her willingness to restrain him, and a family institution that only now, long after her death, faces the consequences of that devotion, has evolved from the beginning with an assaulted aide and a quiet "I know what he is like." There is no indication in Robert Hardman's book that the Queen looked away. Instead, it presents the more agonizing charge that she stared directly at her kid, knew exactly who he was, and still opted for safety over responsibility. It's a conclusion that elicits both pity and condemnation. The image of a lady who was exceptionally good at her duties in every area, with the exception of the one in which her maternal instinct overcame her otherwise unhearing judgment. Whether history views such impulse as a human weakness that can be forgiven or a consequential leadership failure may be totally dependent on the lens you finally decide to use.